Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we're here for another poetry discussion. A poetry discussion that comes to us from one of my more weathered and beat-up collections, William Shakespeare, the Sonnets and Other Love Poems. This is the when I made my way through the sonnets and the other love poems of Shakespeare, this was the collection that I made my way through, and it is so old, some of you will not have any chance of recognizing this. It is a collection from Borders. Some of you have no idea what Borders was. Borders was a Barnes & Noble type bookstore that have since been put out, since Amazon was just a bookstore. They say that Amazon is what actually put under Borders. The truth to that, I have no idea. But it was awfully coincidental timing if that is not the way that worked out. Sonnet 18 is the sonnet that we will be talking about today. Let's go ahead and start with the reading. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometimes declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wander'st in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So this is actually, I think, one of the easier of the Shakespeare sonnets, Shakespearean sonnets, the sonnets in general to understand. I think part of that, I think that adds to part of the fact that not only is this probably the best known of Shakespeare's sonnets, this is probably one of the greatest known poems in the English language. If you start the phrase, shall I compare thee, I guarantee you more people will be able to finish the line than are able to finish probably any other line of English poetry, perhaps in the United States, with the exception of I took the path less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. I think maybe that is the only other line of poetry that could, in American English, obviously Shakespeare's not from America, but just saying, I don't think Frost is as well known in England or other English-speaking countries as Shakespeare is known in the United States. So there's an interpretation that gets very little airplay with this poem that I'm going to go into because it is so interesting to me. But I want to talk about a few other things first. And the first thing that I want to talk about, which will actually sort of play into the fact, into the fact that this second interpretation gets so little airplay. Whenever this poem is talked about, I don't think the interpretation I'm going to mention in this video is brought up, but maybe 1 in 100. I think the first time I heard about it was not actually in a class. I think I was visiting a professor's office, and I was just throwing around, so much stuff going on in Shakespeare's sonnets, and this idea was thrown out there. But Shakespeare, these sonnets are done so damn well that there's almost, at the end of it, nothing left to talk about. These sonnets are done so well that at the end of everything, you almost just want to give up. You almost just, the same professor with whom I was speaking about, I think, about this interpretation, also said that he thought that it was possible for the English language to be broken. And Um, I'm blanking on the yeah. Give me 1 second here. He thought that it was possible for the English language to be broken, and he thought that Paradise Lost, yeah, by Milton. He thought that Paradise Lost broke the English language, and there's no point to doing it after that. Now, in the month of February 2022, I posted to my Patreon an essay as to whether or not I think love poetry is dead. And my answer, in part, was yeah, I think love poetry is dead, but I think it's because of the advent or the popularization of music. With the popularization of music, much like the invention of photograph divorced the idea of painting from the necessity of verisimilitude, the advent of popularized music and radio, things like that, really sort of divorced poetry from the necessity of rhythm and rhyme and simple emotion, things like that. That's over on the Patreon. If you do join the Patreon, I ask that you only join at the $1 level because I have a difficult time adding content to the Patreon and I feel very guilty. But I think that Shakespeare, in the same way that my professor had thought that Milton's Paradise Lost had broke the English language, I think Shakespeare really broke the English language, especially with these sonnets here, because after these, like, what's really the point in trying? Why go forward with that? But there's a lot of, so getting into the poem, there's a lot of conjecture over Shakespeare's sonnets. Who are they to? Who are they about? All of these things. And that's fun to do from time to time. It's fun to play that game. But I'm not sure we need to really do that for this poem. This poem is part of the Fair Youth sequence, which is sonnet 1 through 126. I can't remember off the top of my head how many sonnets there are. But it is necessary sort of that we realize that sonnet 18 is very early in this collection because, why am I not finding, it's 154, I thought, yeah, 154. There are 154 sonnets. This is early in the collection. This is a comparison to a summer day. So what we're doing here is looking at things in the grand scheme of things versus the poem itself. If we're able to conceptualize that this poem happens early in the process, it is necessary to take a step back and just realize the level of greatness that we're looking at. Sonnet 18, there's 154 sonnets. Already in Sonnet 18, you have probably the most quotable line of poetry in the English language. So the very first line of poetry in the sonnets, from fairest creature we desire increase. Now this is one of, again, the more well-known sonnets. But I think that one of the reasons that is one of the more well-known sonnets is probably because a lot of people stop after that. A lot of people stop because Shakespeare broke the English language. It's a little bit difficult to understand, and there's no, okay, so in numerology, right, numbers that stick out, 18 is not one of them. So by number, there's no reason to remember 18. By order in the sequence, there's no reason to remember 18. By the fact that there's 154 of these poems, 18 is the one that really sticks out, but it's because it's so damn good. So I'm going to read the poem one more time, and I want you to listen, because listening is sort of part of the interpretation here, because there's a pun. If there is an interpretation to be had for this, there's a pun, and Shakespeare was no stranger to puns. So listen for all of the monetary type words that I'm going to say, all of the stuff that has to do with money. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So the first thing I think is necessary to talk about when we're talking about monetary language to do with money, because there's three that are often quoted in this argument, but one that I think oftentimes goes unmentioned, because it's not necessarily a money word in today's world. Now I lost my lines here. So the first here is, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Summer's lease, you sign a lease at an apartment. You sign a lease for a car. This is a contract. Summer's lease hath all too short a date. When you're looking back at the very early part of this poem, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Summer's lease hath all too short a date. You, being more lovely and more temperate than summer, you are compared to summer, you are better than summer, the proverbial you here. But summer's lease hath all too short a date. Therefore, you have all too short a date. So there's one. That's the first one in the poem. Next, the next one that comes up oftentimes is the pun. You get down to, and every fair from fair sometime declines. Not necessarily. F-A-I-R is not a monetary word. F-A-R-E is a monetary word. If you're catching a carriage, you pay the fare. If you're catching a taxi, you pay the fare. If you're crossing a bridge, you pay the fare. Every fair from fair sometimes declines. Everything that is the money, sometimes, from time to time, doesn't get all the money that it deserves. And this word, fair, F-A-R-E. So, we've got two monetary terms here in this greater context of the poem. But they don't necessarily really connect to what we're talking about yet. The last one, ost. So apparently, and this is something I had to look up, I didn't remember this part. Ost, I guess, in the language of Shakespeare, could have meant to own, right? But here it means to owe. We have the line here, nor lose possession, not necessarily a monetary term, but if you're speaking in monetary terms, that becomes important. Nor lose possession of that fare thou owest. Owest also means to owe. So lose possession of the fare thou owest. If we go back to the F-A-R-E interpretation, what we're talking about is to basically drop your money. So where do all of these money interpretations interact with the greater meaning of the poem and the summer day? These are the three lines that oftentimes when I've heard or read this argument taking place with this poem, and apparently I don't know the others, but apparently this is one of the themes that pops up in Shakespeare's poetry from time to time, is the idea of money. Um, I don't know any others. So if I talk about them on the channel, I will have had to have learned about them since this time. But those are the three terms, like I was saying, that are often attributed to this, oh, it's a subtext here of monetary stuff, of financial terms, which you're not going to read this and see that, right? It's just going to go way over your head. But neither does it connect to the central theme of shall I compare thee to a summer's day, thou art more lovely and more temperate. Until you read this line. Because this is a monetary financial term that is, I think, oftentimes overlooked because it does not necessarily work into financial or monetary terms in today's world unless you're real in tune with financial and monetary terms. And often is his gold complexion dimmed. So what we do there is we draw the idea of the sun being pretty synonymous with summer. The sun is gold. Gold being riches. Gold, even in Shakespeare's day, the quote-unquote gold standard. So Shakespeare, not only is Shakespeare comparing the subject of this poem to a summer's day, and let's remember, this is in England, right? In England, there's only, and this is statistically true, every year that's ever existed. You can look this up. It's on Wikipedia. In England, there are only 4 days per year where it doesn't rain. Even when it snows, it rains, and it's cloudy, and it's miserable. 4 days a year. You can look it up. There's only 4 days a year that it doesn't rain. They're all in August, by the way. Scheduled like clockwork. And our subject, the thee here, he's better than all those days, right? Our subject here is better than all of the days it doesn't rain in England. Which, look, if we are allowing this monetary theme in there, not only is our subject better than all of the days that it doesn't rain in England, not only is our subject better than summer itself, he's also more valuable than gold. And also, when we talk about it, more valuable than the sun itself. If we're making the inference that the subject here is more valuable than gold, gold being the sun dims, our subject does not, we've really got something going here. So just to read through, with that in mind, let me read through the poem one more time. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So that is what I have to discuss about Sonnet 18. This poetry discussion will be in the Poetry Discussions playlist here on the channel. an ever-growing list, as I will eventually have read and discussed every poem ever written. It really helps me out here on the channel if you do decide to hit that like button. If you are here by chance and not design, having found this video through searching for Shakespeare Sonnet 18, consider hitting that subscribe button and sticking around for all of the other literature that I talk about here on the channel, and I hope to see you back for the next poetry discussion, short story discussion, novel read-along, writer's quote, whatever it is I'm doing here on the channel at that time.